What happens when Isaac Newton becomes Sherlock Holmes and goes on a crime-hunting spree? The man he was chasing was a master con artist who had plunged the entire British economy into crisis. How did that battle of wits finally go? During the 16th and early 17th centuries, silver coins became the most popular means of payment in commercial transactions in England. Before 1662, these coins were crafted entirely by hand by hammering directly onto a die. The result was uneven coins that were easy to cheat. Criminals could use simple tools like razors or scissors to remove a small amount of silver from the edge of each coin. Once enough was collected, they would melt it down to mint new coins or forge it into bars. Furthermore, since silver prices in cities like Paris or Amsterdam were always higher than in England, illegal exports abroad became increasingly common. To deal with this situation, the British government decided to replace the old method with a new technique. No longer requiring human power, horse-powered devices were introduced to standardize the size and shape of coins. Most importantly, the edges of these new coins were finely engraved with ridges, making any signs of sanding immediately visible. However, counterfeiting persisted because even though production technology had changed, old coins continued to circulate alongside new ones. Decades after that reform, the British Treasury admitted that less than 1% of the coins in circulation were machine-minted. Fraudulent activities continued to spread like an epidemic. By 1697, the government decided to classify counterfeiting as treason. Possession of even one illegal foundry part could result in a death sentence, with the cruel penalty of being quartered by horses. This threat of intimidation made most criminals hesitate. But not William Chaloner. Born into a tailor family in a rural area of central England, Chaloner was known for being unruly and refusing to study. When he was 15, his parents sent him to Birmingham to learn the nail-making trade. This city was known as the counterfeit capital of England, and it became fertile ground for a scheming man like Chaloner to learn the most sophisticated counterfeiting techniques of the time. In 1681, he left Birmingham with nothing and went to London to make a living. There, he began a prosperous business selling erotic pocket watches, which were luxury items with lewd pictures inside for the wealthy upper class. In the process, he encountered an accomplice who shared his cunning nature. The two con men immediately teamed up and became a pair of fraudsters who scammed the entire city. They started by selling fake medicine to dying plague patients, then moved into fortune-telling. The trick was simple. One person would steal goods, and the other would pretend to be a seer who demanded a ransom to help the owner find the property. Not stopping there, they also cleverly seduced young girls into believing they could see images of their future husbands. By 1690, after being suspected of being involved in a major theft, Chaloner was forced to go into hiding to avoid capture. When things had calmed down, he returned to London, disguised as a second-hand clothes merchant. However, he still quietly learned metallurgy under the guidance of Patrick Coffey, a master goldsmith. In 1691, the counterfeiting work officially began. In a short time, a well-organized, large-scale production line was born. Chaloner was in charge of creating the coin's serrated edge to make it look authentic. The engravings for the coins were made with Thomas Taylor, a renowned expert in metal engraving. Within months, they were producing French gold pistone coins, which were worth about 17 cents, almost a month's salary for an average person at that time. Next, he counterfeited coins and had them plated with gold to enhance their finish. Finally, the counterfeit money was smuggled into the market through street hustlers. Chaloner became rich quickly, buying a house in the suburbs and his own carriage and taking on the airs of an aristocrat. It is said that he was so satisfied with the quality of his fake coins that he felt sad to see them put into use. At the same time, He cut off relations with his wife and children and started having relationships with new lovers, most of whom were accomplices in his crimes. But his luck did not last forever. In early 1692, news of the arrest of an associate caused Chaloner great panic. For 2 consecutive days, he frantically printed coins for self-defense and then escaped to the city's suburbs. He only dared to return to London after he heard that his accomplice had been hanged. This time, he did not stop at producing counterfeit coins. He hired a secret printing group to reprint the proclamation of James II, the exiled leader of the Jacobites, a force that was seeking to overthrow the government in England. Chaloner then invited them to his house at a pre-arranged time. When the group arrived with the leaflets, authorities suddenly raided and seized all the confiscated printed materials. Chaloner immediately received a reward from the government of up to £1,000, a huge sum at that time. Later that year, at the height of the monetary crisis, Chaloner suddenly appeared as an expert with a series of convincing proposals. He released several notes criticizing the National Mint for incompetence and called for a major mint reform. His proposed solutions included increasing the depth of the engraving on the coin, prohibiting access to engraving tools, and adjusting the price of silver, but it was all a carefully prepared act. Chaloner's real goal was to infiltrate the royal mint and find a way to manipulate the machine from within. At that time, in the eyes of many, this agency was simply an outdated administrative body that was slow and easily confused. However, that completely changed because the man running the royal mint was Isaac Newton, one of the greatest physicists, mathematicians, and astronomers in history. But why did Newton appear in this crisis? After many years of teaching and research at Cambridge University, Newton became frustrated with his quest for the laws of nature. A man who once boldly stuck sharp objects in his eyes to learn the theory of light now found himself stuck in a dull cycle of science. He believed that his great achievements were in the past, and he himself was becoming increasingly erratic and irritable. At the slightest conflict, Newton was ready to vent his anger with hateful letters, accusing his old friends of betrayal and conspiring against him. The scientist even fell into a state of exhaustion, insomnia, paranoia, and depression that lasted for 18 months. To get through this dark period, Newton needed a new challenge. He expressed his desire to leave Cambridge and seek a civil service position in London to Charles Montagu, his former student, who was then serving as British Chancellor of the Exchequer. Not long after, the letter arrived. The notice stated that Newton had been nominated for the post of Overseer of the Royal Mint of England. Without hesitation, he immediately accepted the invitation and was present at the headquarters in the Tower of London. Although the title sounded powerful, in reality, it had long been just an illusory position. No one expected the incumbent to interfere deeply in internal operations. However, Newton did not go there to be a figurehead. Upon taking office, he proposed a massive plan to end the currency chaos. Millions of pounds worth of silver were purchased, sorted, and reminted into new coins of the correct denomination. At the London Tower, he established a production line with a workforce of 500 workers, operating continuously for 4 years, smelting almost the entire coin supply of the country. To speed up progress, subsidiary workshops were set up in many other cities such as Bristol, Chester, Exeter, Norwich, and York. Newton used all his analytical sharpness to improve his work process. He meticulously recorded every detail, such as fuel consumption, boiler capacity over time, and the physical limits of workers and draft horses before fatigue. Based on that, he could determine the appropriate pace for each stage, direct the old machinery, and deploy new infrastructure. Under his strict direction, the entire production line worked 6 days a week, from 4 a.m. until midnight. Before Newton took over, No one believed the mint could hit 15,000 coins per week, yet in a short time, that number surpassed the 50,000 mark. Between 1696 and 1699, the total value of silver coins minted reached £5.1 million, nearly double the output during the previous 35 years. Modern experts also estimate that Newton's improvements saved over 41,000 years of photographic printing, equivalent to £3 million today. However, Newton's role did not stop at producing money. As director of the mint, he was also responsible for prosecuting counterfeiters. Initially, not very interested in the job of hunting criminals, he sent a letter requesting to be exempted from this role. But the response from the royal family was clear. It was a mandatory part of the job, so the scientist had to quickly get used to the task, and, as usual, he threw himself into the work with unexpected intensity and determination. He would disguise himself and directly infiltrate bars and places where criminals often hang out to search for information. He also hired private detectives to track down counterfeiting gangs. Newton even followed criminals to their hiding places many times, interrogating them directly on the spot. At the Newgate house, which was full of rats and diseases, the genius scientist was also often seen conducting interrogation sessions. In just 18 months, more than 100 confrontations with witnesses, informants, and suspects took place. As a result, 28 were successfully prosecuted, and most were sentenced to death. But that was just the beginning. In early 1697, Chaloner appeared before a House of Commons committee, bearing as evidence a counterfeit coin he had crafted, accusing the royal mint of complicity in this crime, and claiming he had the power to reform the entire process. The fall left the artist stunned. On May 15th, the committee decided to require Newton to assist Chaloner in testing the proposals, but he was not so easily manipulated. Newton was no stranger to the name Chaloner. A few months earlier, while investigating a counterfeit coinage ring, he had obtained a statement from a man facing execution, Peter Cook. In order to reduce his sentence, this guy revealed the extremely secretive leader in the criminal world, William Chaloner. After some investigation, Newton found out that this guy had been arrested several times for various scams and even served time in prison. However, because at that time there was no unified criminal record, it was easy for the scammers to move from place to place to start the fraud process again. Although the information was not enough to prosecute at the time, it left a big question mark in Newton's mind. When he read Chaloner's petition to the House of Commons, he immediately became suspicious of his true motives. Under pressure from the National Assembly, Newton firmly refused the request to let Chaloner have access to the Vietnamese vertical machine. For when he took office as overseer of the mint in December 1696, he swore an oath to protect absolute technological secrecy. Any act of violation could be considered a betrayal of allegiance to the monarchy. So instead of letting Chaloner experiment, Newton implemented the suggested methods himself. The results were not immediately predictable, and the measures were useless. The techniques mentioned were again exaggerated and completely lacking in practical application. From that time on, Newton began a large-scale hunt to expose the notorious moneymaker. By 1997, he found an important clue. John Pierce, a former associate of Chaloner, secretly denounced him in the local court. The shocking confession revealed that Chaloner was running a counterfeit money production line right in the heart of the smuggling ring. Newton immediately sent his people to the fake Emperor Foundry and interrogated them. But Chaloner was a seasoned criminal. He and his accomplices quickly realized that Pierce was at the Tower of London and guessed that he had betrayed them. They immediately took action before she provided much evidence that Vepus was guilty of counterfeiting money without incident. Newton personally bailed the witness out of jail. He continued his campaign to hunt down Chaloner with determination. To gain independent investigative powers, he applied to be a district judge and personally searched the sex sites. At the same time, he also recruited a network of undercover agents to infiltrate bars and brothels to collect information. After months of persistence, the truth gradually came to light. He decided to bring this ringleader to the court. Knowing that he was about to be prosecuted, Chaloner counterattacked by accusing Newton of fabricating everything in retaliation for the corruption at the time the coin was exposed. He even requested an official investigation into this incident. Undaunted, Newton played his trump card. He asked to summon Thomas Holloway as a witness. He had been planted in the mint with the aim of stealing specialized tools. Once again, predicting the situation from inside the house from Newgate, this ringleader asked someone to pay Holloway £20 to escape to Scotland until the robbery was over. Without key witness testimony, Chaloner was found not guilty. Immediately after the trial in May 1698, the British Council established a special commission of inquiry to clarify the allegations surrounding the mint's operations. Despite being insulted and angry at the slander, Newton still chose to respond with a full and coherent rebuttal. The investigation did not find any wrongdoing. Ironically, this schemer used the hearing itself to mock Newton and publicly brag about his escape. Shortly after, Chaloner embarked on a new mission. This time, he forged withdrawal slips from the government lottery program. This is a document that allows soldiers to withdraw up to £50 from the state treasury. He prepared to lend money to hire someone to make quality copper engravings. Unfortunately for him, the lender was secretly a member of the committee investigating the mint's operations. The fatal mistake that caused the start of the control lockout. In November 1698, Chaloner was arrested on charges of forging lottery tickets. However, the key evidence, the bronze plate, disappeared without a trace. This oversight of Newton's once again helped him escape punishment. Furthermore, the act of counterfeiting lottery tickets is not within the direct jurisdiction of the mint director. Instead of giving up, Newton immediately changed strategy. He secretly searched for evidence of Chaloner's alleged involvement in counterfeiting. By early 1699, Newton had collected at least 44 testimonies against this island rocket. He also secretly arranged for agents to infiltrate the prison to monitor Chaloner's every move. Several key witnesses were allowed temporary release from prison to meet Newton at his uncle's bar. There they recounted in detail every incident related to Chaloner. Since that night, Thomas Holloway, the former accomplice who had fled to Scotland, has returned to London. Newton quickly gave him money to keep Thomas and added more evidence to the prosecution's case. In May 1699, the trial concerning the forgery of lottery tickets officially opened. Chaloner immediately blamed Thomas Carter, his longtime collaborator, who also directly engraved the print. He also offered to hand over the evidence in exchange for immunity from prosecution. As a result, the original clubs were officially disbanded. Surprisingly, Newton presented a completely new indictment to the court to prosecute again. Chaloner was forced to counterfeit 100 coins of 5 different denominations in just one day. In addition, 8 witnesses were called to testify about Chaloner's criminal history. Realizing that his chance of escape was gone, he pretended to run. This is a classic trick used by many criminals to avoid criminal responsibility. In the trial, he responded furiously, insulting all parties involved and accusing them of perjury to protect himself. But this time, the plan was no longer effective, as the jury took only a few minutes to find him guilty. Facing imminent death, falling into despair for the next 2 weeks, he wrote a series of letters to Newton and the judge, the content of which constantly changed from blaming, begging, threatening to despair until March 22, 1699. Chaloner hanged himself at Tib in the cold, damp weather. His body convulsed violently in the last minutes of his life. Newton, when witnessing that end, wrote in his diary that an individual who knows how to use his talent for justice and morality can become a useful person to the country. Although Newton won an absolute victory, there was one detail that made him unable to be completely satisfied. Chaloner was never officially convicted of the crime of falsifying the lottery. What was even more poignant was that the very day before he was hanged, he sent Newton the copper plate. This is the most important piece of evidence ever lost in the investigation of lottery ticket counterfeiting. If he is not convicted in court, the action will be seen as a strong retort that Newton can hardly defeat him perfectly legally. On April 16, 1705, the scientist was knighted by Queen Anne for his great contributions in both the fields of science and national monetary management. Newton continued to serve as director of the Mint until his death in 1727. Although this story is just a small, little-known chapter in Isaac Newton's great life, its value is undeniable. His influence on British royal coinage is still evident today. In 2017, on the occasion of the 375th anniversary of Newton's birth, a special 50-note coin was issued to commemorate the great contributions of a man who contributed to shaping the prestige and standards of the British monetary system.